Today's model of success will be presented in French and English, with subtitles in Arabic, Aulasese Vietnamese, Chinese, English, French, German, Hungarian, Indonesian, Italian, Japanese, Korean, Mongolian, Persian, Portuguese, Russian and Spanish. Téléspectateurs glorieux, bienvenue dans l'édition de cette semaine de modèles de réussite. Aujourd'hui, nous présentons une émission spéciale sur le chercheur sénégalais influent, M. Cheikh Anta Diop. Supreme Master Television a interviewé M. Molefi Keita Santé, professeur à Temple University en Pennsylvanie aux États-Unis, où il a fondé le premier doctorat en études afro-américaines en 1987. M. Assanté a partagé ses connaissances sur la vie fascinante et les accomplissements de M. Cheikh Anta Diop.
Cheikh Anta Diop, the great lion of Africa in many ways, was born in December of 1923 in a small village. He was the descendant of a very famous and important intellectual family. His grandfather, Mor Samba Diop, was considered the leading Islamic intellectual in his region, and his father, who passed away when Cheikh Anta was probably only about 3 or 4, was Masamba Sassoon. So he was really influenced by his mother, Maguette Diop, who was a brilliant woman, one with tremendous savoir-faire.
Cheikh Anta Diop a fait ses premières études dans une école islamique traditionnelle avant d'aller à Saint-Louis, la capitale de l'Afrique occidentale française coloniale. Étudiant, Cheikh Anta Diop aimait étudier les riches cultures du monde.
In St. Louis, he was influenced by elements coming from France, New York, from Liberia, from Sierra Leone, where many of the great scholars of West Africa would come to St. Louis, and he met Jacques Mars from Haiti, Richard Wright. Later on in the 60s and 70s, people call him the Pharaoh of knowledge.
En effet, la grande intelligence de Cheikh Anta Diop lui a valu une place à l'université Paris 1, la Sorbonne, en France, pour ses études supérieures. Il a étudié la physique avec le prix Nobel Frédéric Joliot-Curie, beau-fils de la célèbre Marie Curie. Cheikh Anta Diop a finalement traduit des parties de la théorie de la relativité d'Einstein dans sa langue maternelle, le Wolof. Son expérience à l'étranger l'a amené à réfléchir plus profondément sur ses racines africaines.
What he discovered when he was in Paris, trying to study physics, was that you could not study any aspect of human knowledge where it seemed that Africa was a part of that knowledge. He began to ask himself, what has Africa contributed to human knowledge, to science, to social science? Who are we as intellectuals?
Dans sa quête de réponse, Cheikh Anta Diop a mené des recherches approfondies et fait remonter la source des cultures africaines à l'ancien royaume d'Égypte.
When he was 25 years old, he wrote in the journal called the Présence Africaine. He wrote an article where he asked an important question: when shall we speak of an African Renaissance? He went to study linguistics, history, philosophy, anthropology. These became his sciences. What he discovered was that in Africa, since it had been colonized after the 1884 and 1885 Berlin Conference by European nations, everything in Africa really looked toward Europe, particularly in an intellectual tradition. He said we have to break this, and we have to re-examine Africa for itself. And then he made one important statement that became perhaps the main proposition for all of his studies. Egypt is to Africa as Greece is to Europe. What he was saying was this: if we are going to understand African cultures in a contemporary sense, we must understand its classical past. We must be able to show how Yoruba culture, how Akan culture, Mandinka culture, Dinka culture, Nua culture, how these cultures are related to the classical civilizations of the Nile Valley. Because if we don't understand that connection, we will never understand anything in Shona or Zulu or anything elsewhere. It was Sheikh Anta Diop who grew up and really reclaimed Egypt for black Africa. That was one of his major contributions.
Lorsqu'il était à Paris, Cheikh Anta Diop faisait partie de l'Organisation nationale africaine, le Rassemblement démocratique africain, RDA, dirigé par le premier président de la Côte d'Ivoire, Félix Houphouët-Boigny. De 1950 à 1953, il fut le secrétaire général des étudiants du RDA à Paris et contribuait à la tenue du premier congrès des étudiants panafricains à Paris en 1951. Alors que les étudiants du RDA travaillaient à la restauration de la conscience nationale africaine, Cheikh Anta Diop a souligné l'importance de la perspective scientifique, socio-historique de ce mouvement. Bien qu'il ait présenté dans sa thèse de doctorat sa découverte que les anciens Égyptiens étaient noirs, ce ne fut pas accepté initialement.
They finally approved his dissertation, which was published in 1954 as Nation Nègre et Culture, Black Nations and Culture, in the journal Présence Africaine. But then it was published in the United States of America later in English called The African Origin of Civilization. John Henry Clark was a professor at Hunter College in New York. He was a great historian, and he learned and he wrote about the work that Sheikh Anta Diop had done, and he introduced, in a sense, Sheikh Anta Diop to the audience in America. And people began to read him. Many African scholars, such as Ivan van Sertima, Joseph ben Yuccanan, Leonard Jeffries, Asa Brown, began to read the work of Sheikh Anta Diop and began to popularize his work in many ways.
Les réalisations du chercheur Cheikh Anta Diop ont résulté de sa détermination et de son travail acharné.
I think humility. That is the one thing that I saw in him. Humility, but also stubbornness, an incredible stubbornness. He would research everything. He did his work in history and linguistics and philosophy and anthropology and so forth. He went and said, you know what, I need to know all I need to find out about matriarchy. So I'm going to read every major book written about matriarchy. And he did. He said, you know, most of Africa is matriarchal. And not only the matriarch in Africa, it goes back to the origin. He says if you look at most African societies now, you have this matriarchy as the main source.
Outre le fait de prouver la structure matriarcale de l'Afrique, l'une peut-être des conclusions les plus hardies et les plus étonnantes de M. Cheikh Anta Diop fut les origines anthropologiques de l'humanité.
Sheikh Anta studied very early on anthropology, and so he came to the conclusion that we have to look at the migrations out of Africa. These migrations out of Africa have occurred over a long period of time. And he makes one statement that is very profound. He says, up until around 70,000 years ago, all Homo sapiens were black. When the migrations happened, people went to different climates, diets changed, and we get differentiation. Now what we discover is that whether you take anthropology or whether you take biology, Sheikh Anta Diop was correct. The biologists say we have DNA that all comes right from the same place, all of us. And then the anthropologists have also shown that if you look at the fossil remains, particularly of Homo sapiens, you only find them in Africa.
Ce grand savant a également étudié une branche spécifique de la linguistique, grâce à laquelle il a trouvé la racine des langues africaines.
He wrote a major work on the Egyptian language as being the origin of many of the African languages. He is a very incredible scholar who takes the linguistic work And he shows you these interconnections, even through the symbols of we call it CCAM. Now, the Greeks looked at the writing and they call them hieroglyphics, yes. But the African scholars now call it CCAM, C-I-K-A-M, meaning the language of Kemet. Because ancient Egypt was not called Egypt by the Africans. The Africans called it Kemet, meaning the land of the blacks.
En 1974, M. Cheikh Anta Diop a présenté cette théorie à des égyptologues lors d'un symposium de l'Organisation des Nations Unies pour l'éducation, la science et la culture UNESCO au Caire en Égypte. Il a également rédigé le chapitre sur les origines des Égyptiens dans l'histoire générale de l'Afrique, publié par l'UNESCO. Tout au long de sa vie, Cheikh Anta Diop fut reconnu à travers le monde pour ses contributions à l'histoire de l'Afrique.
I went to Dakar to meet him, to just be able to see this great man. And he was very, very patient, very humble. You would not have thought that he was a man who had achieved so much. He was the author of nearly 15 or 16 major works. In addition to that, many scientific papers. He became the director of the Institute for Black Africa. It was called Fundamental Institute of Black Africa, IFA. The African scholars had met in 1960 and had said that the two most significant African intellectuals up until that time have been W.B. Du Bois and Cheikh Anta Diop. I went there very humbly to his office. And he greeted me, come in, you sit down, and I took him a small book that I had written. He took this book and he looked at it and then basically asked me why had I come to see him. And I said, you know what, I've come because I want to be like you. I want to defend Africa intellectually. And he looked at me and he said, this young man, Africa needs no defense. Africa must be advanced. This had a very major influence on my work in Afrocentricity.
Profondément inspiré par cet intellectuel éminent, le professeur en santé a écrit un livre primé sur Cheikh Anta Diop afin de partager son héritage avec les générations futures.
This book, Cheikh Anta Diop, was published by the University of Sankore Press in Los Angeles, California. So this was an award given to me by the 20th anniversary Cheikh Anta Diop International Conference Commemorative Book Award, and it was given for me in appreciation for interpreting the ideas, the methods, and Afrocentric legacy of Cheikh Anta Diop in a single, accessible, exemplary volume.
La quête inébranlable de Cheikh Anta Diop pour livrer la véritable histoire de l'Afrique est vraiment exceptionnelle. Ces découvertes remarquables et de grande portée sont un élément fédérateur et une source d'inspiration pour l'histoire africaine et enfin celle de notre monde.
Cheikh Anta Diop is a treasure for the world. His work will live a long time, and his intellectual inquiry, discipline, and patience is the greatest legacy that an intellectual can leave.
Pour de plus amples informations sur M. Molefi Kete Asante et ses œuvres, veuillez visiter www.asante.net. Pour acheter le livre de M. Molefi Kete Asante, Cheikh Anta Diop, un portrait intellectuel, vous pouvez aller sur www.amazon.com. Brillant téléspectateurs, merci d'avoir été avec nous aujourd'hui dans Modèle de réussite. Restez sur Supreme Master Television pour végétarisme, le mode de vie noble, juste après les nouvelles déceptions. Que l'amour du ciel guide votre vie. Brilliant viewers, thank you for joining us today for Models of Success. Please, stay tuned to Supreme Master Television for vegetarianism, the noble way of living. Coming up next, after noteworthy news, may heaven's love be your guide in life.
For more details, please visit www.suprememastertv.com/MOS.